Clint Eastwood steps out of his car at a quiet roadside gas station, the kind of place most people wouldn't give a second glance. But for the people lucky enough to cross paths with him that day, what happened here would be unforgettable. Eastwood, with his signature calm and composed demeanor, wasn't just here to refuel his car. His sharp eyes quickly noticed something: a young, pregnant woman behind the counter, working tirelessly under the scorching summer sun. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't just running the gas station. She was fighting a silent battle to make ends meet, despite her obvious exhaustion. Clint's gaze lingered for a moment, and something about her resolve struck a chord deep within him. What happened next wasn't a scene from one of his iconic films, but a moment of real-life heroism that would touch hearts far beyond that small, dusty town. The gas station was a modest one, a small stop in a quiet Californian town, where life moved at its own unhurried pace. The air shimmered with heat waves, and the sound of cicadas echoed faintly in the background. For Sarah, this was just another long day on the job. Despite being several months pregnant, she moved with determination, stocking shelves, refilling ice bins, and helping customers at the register. Her movements were slower than usual, but she never let herself stop for long. Every minute mattered. Every dollar counted. Sarah's story wasn't uncommon, but it was no less remarkable. A single mother-to-be, she was doing everything she could to prepare for her baby's arrival. The gas station job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. She had dreams of a better life, but for now, she was focused on surviving. Little did she know, her life was about to change in the most unexpected way. It was then that Clint Eastwood arrived, his car pulling into the station with a smooth hum of the engine. He stepped out, dressed casually, with a quiet air of humility that belied his fame. Clint wasn't one to draw attention to himself, preferring the simplicity of everyday life whenever he could. As he approached the gas pump, he glanced toward the counter and spotted Sarah. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. She was wiping sweat from her brow, her tired eyes focused on the task at hand. Clint could see her strength, but also her struggle. Clint Eastwood stood by the gas pump, his attention fixed on Sarah. It wasn't unusual for him to notice the details most people overlooked. It was part of what made him a brilliant storyteller. But this wasn't about a script or a movie. It was real life. Sarah's situation spoke to him on a deeper level. Here was a young woman, visibly pregnant, pushing herself to the limit to keep up with the demands of her job. Her every movement carried an air of determination, but Clint could also see the toll it was taking on her. As she helped a customer load a heavy case of bottled water into their car, Clint noticed her pause for a moment, placing a hand on her lower back. The heat was relentless, and the work wasn't easy. Yet Sarah never let her smile falter when she interacted with the customers. It was clear she was the kind of person who gave everything she had, no matter how hard things got. Clint couldn't help but think about his own journey, about the challenges he had faced when he was younger, before the fame and fortune. He had always admired people who worked hard, especially those who did so despite overwhelming odds. Watching Sarah reminded him of why he had always believed in lending a hand when it mattered most. And in that moment, Clint decided he wouldn't just drive away and forget this woman's struggle. He was going to do something about it. Clint approached the counter, his steps deliberate but unassuming. Sarah glanced up as he entered the small air-conditioned store. Despite her exhaustion, she greeted him with a polite smile. "Hi there. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice tinged with a quiet tiredness but still warm and welcoming. Clint returned the smile and asked for a bottle of water. As Sarah turned to grab it from the cooler, Clint took a moment to look around the store. It was clean and well-stocked, clearly a result of Sarah's hard work. When she returned, he paid for the water and paused before saying, "You've got your hands full here. Must be tough working in this heat, especially, well, in your condition." Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She was used to people commenting on her pregnancy, but something about Clint's tone wasn't condescending or intrusive. It was genuine concern. She gave a small shrug and said, "It's not easy, but you do what you have to. I've got a baby on the way, so there's no slowing down." Her words were straightforward, but Clint could hear the quiet pride in her voice. "You're doing a great job," Clint said simply, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity. Sarah smiled again, a little wider this time, but Clint could tell that beneath her calm exterior there was a world of stress she wasn't letting on. He thanked her and left the store, but as he stepped outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. As Clint reached his car, he paused, gripping the door handle but not opening it. His mind was racing, replaying the brief exchange he'd just had with Sarah. Her resilience and determination were clear, but so was the weight she carried. Clint wasn't the kind of man to ignore someone in need, especially when it was someone as hardworking and humble as Sarah. He stood there for a moment, looking back at the gas station through the dusty summer haze. He glanced down at his hands, calloused from years of working his way up in the film industry. He knew what it was like to work hard, to struggle for every dollar. And while his circumstances had changed over the years, he had never forgotten where he came from or the people who helped him along the way. A thought formed in his mind, and once it did, there was no turning back. Clint walked back into the store, his boots making soft thuds against the worn linoleum floor. Sarah looked up, surprised to see him again. "Forget something?" she asked, her voice light but curious. Clint nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You could say that," he replied, reaching into his back pocket to pull out his checkbook. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly as she watched him, unsure of what was about to happen. "Listen," Clint began, his voice steady and calm. "I can see how hard you're working, and I want to do something to make things a little easier for you." Sarah blinked, clearly caught off guard. She opened her mouth to protest, but Clint held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Please, just let me do this." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she watched Clint open his checkbook. "You really don't have to do this," she said, her voice wavering between gratitude and disbelief. She had seen acts of kindness before, but this felt different. This wasn't just someone helping her carry a heavy box or offering a polite word. It was something far more profound. Clint looked up briefly, meeting her gaze with a calm, steady expression. "I know I don't have to," Clint replied, his tone reassuring. "But I want to. You're working hard, and I admire that. Sometimes people just need a little help to get through the rough patches." With that, he began writing, the pen gliding smoothly across the check as he filled it out. He tore the check from the book and held it out to Sarah. She hesitated, her eyes wide as she took in the amount. It wasn't just a little help. It was enough to cover months of expenses, maybe even more. This is too much," Sarah stammered, shaking her head slightly. "I can't accept this." But Clint simply smiled, his voice firm yet kind. "You can, and you will. Think of it as an investment in your future, and your baby's future." His words carried a sense of purpose, and despite her initial hesitation, Sarah slowly reached out and took the check, her fingers brushing against the paper as if it were fragile. She looked down at the check, her vision blurring with tears as she saw the amount clearly for the first time. It was more than she ever could have expected. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Clint gave a small nod and said, "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself and that baby." Sarah stood there, clutching the check like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to compose herself. I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. This is going to change everything for me." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. For so long she had felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe a little easier. Clint watched her reaction with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He wasn't the type to bask in recognition or applause. He had done this for her, not for himself. "Sometimes life just throws too much at one person," he said, his voice calm and steady. "If I can make it a little easier, I'm glad to do it. You deserve it." Sarah took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. "You have no idea what this means to me," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "This isn't just about the money. It's about knowing that someone believes in me, that someone sees how hard I'm trying." Clint gave her a small nod, his expression softening. "You're doing more than just trying. You're doing everything you can. That's worth a lot in my book." In that moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't just the financial relief Clint had given her. It was the reminder that kindness and humanity still existed in the world. As Clint prepared to leave, the small gesture of his kindness began to ripple outward in ways he might not have expected. The gas station manager, who had quietly witnessed the exchange from a distance, approached Sarah after Clint had gone. "Was that Clint Eastwood?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sarah, still wiping tears from her cheeks, nodded slowly. "Yeah, and he just did something I'll never forget." Word spread quickly through the small town. In a place where everyone knew each other, news like this didn't stay quiet for long. People talked about how Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood legend, had stopped at their local gas station and done something extraordinary for one of their own. It wasn't just about the money. People were moved by the humanity of the gesture. "It's not every day you see someone like him step up and help like that," one local said. Customers began stopping by the gas station more frequently, not just to fuel up, but to show their support for Sarah. Some offered words of encouragement, while others left small gifts: baby clothes, diapers, and other essentials. The act of kindness Clint had initiated started a chain reaction, uniting the community around Sarah and her unborn child. Even Sarah's regular customers, who had always admired her work ethic, began tipping more generously. "You've always been there for us," one customer said as she handed Sarah a folded $20 bill. "Now it's our turn to be there for you." The outpouring of support brought Sarah to tears once again. She realized that Clint's gesture had done more than relieve her financial burden. It had reminded everyone of the power of compassion. As Clint drove away from the gas station, he couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. The road stretched out ahead of him, but his thoughts lingered on Sarah and her unwavering determination. For Clint, moments like these were what life was really about. It wasn't about the fame, the fortune, or the accolades. It was about the connections you made with people, the chance to make a difference in someone's life, no matter how small or unexpected. He thought about his own journey, the challenges he had faced when he was just starting out. There had been times when a kind word or a helping hand had made all the difference for him. Those moments had stuck with him, shaping the man he had become. And now, he realized, he had the opportunity to pay it forward. Helping Sarah had felt right, like a natural extension of the values he had always tried to live by. Clint couldn't help but smile as he pictured Sarah's reaction, the way her face had lit up with a mixture of shock, gratitude, and hope. He knew that the money itself wasn't the most important part. It was the message it carried. It was a reminder that no matter how tough life got, there were still people out there who cared, who were willing to help, and sometimes that was all someone needed to keep going. As the miles rolled by, Clint felt a quiet sense of peace. He didn't need recognition or thanks. Knowing he had made a difference was enough. For him, this was just another chapter in his story, one that mattered far more than any scene he'd ever filmed. Back at the gas station, Sarah stood for a moment, staring at the check Clint had handed her. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline, a tangible symbol of a future that suddenly seemed less daunting. As the reality of what had happened began to sink in, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The worries that had been weighing her down, how she would pay for baby supplies, how she could manage time off after the baby was born, suddenly felt lighter. She carefully folded the check and placed it in her pocket, but the feeling it gave her stayed in her heart. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream. She thought about how she could prepare a proper nursery, take a short break from work after the baby arrived, and maybe even start saving for her child's future. Clint's generosity had opened a door she hadn't dared to imagine could exist. Sarah decided she wasn't going to waste this opportunity. She sat down at the small table in the back of the store during her break and started jotting down ideas on a notepad. She wrote out a list of essentials she needed for the baby and began brainstorming ways to make the most of this unexpected blessing. For Sarah, this wasn't just a handout. It was a chance to rebuild her life, and she was determined to make every penny count. As the hours passed and the sun began to set, Sarah looked out at the quiet parking lot. The day had been like no other, and she knew she would never forget it. With a deep breath, she whispered, "Thank you, not just to Clint, but to the universe, for reminding her that even in her toughest moments, hope could still find its way to her." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the gas station feeling lighter than she had in months. She carried herself differently, not with less effort, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Her co-workers, noticing the change in her demeanor, couldn't help but ask what had happened. She shared the story of Clint Eastwood's incredible gesture, and their reactions were a mix of disbelief and admiration. "Clint Eastwood? The Clint Eastwood? That's insane!" one of her colleagues exclaimed. Another added, "That just goes to show. You never know who's going to walk through that door." The story spread quickly, not just within the town, but beyond it. Customers began coming in, some out of curiosity, and others wanting to show their support. "You're the one Clint Eastwood helped, right?" a regular customer asked as he handed her a tip far more generous than usual. "He must have seen what we've all known. You're one of the hardest workers I've ever met." Local newspapers picked up the story, framing it as a tale of Hollywood kindness meeting small-town resilience. People began to rally around Sarah, offering her advice, support, and even small acts of kindness of their own. One local business owner offered her a part-time administrative job that could work around her pregnancy and eventual maternity leave. A group of women from the community organized a small baby shower for her, complete with handmade gifts and thoughtful messages. Sarah couldn't believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. It wasn't just the financial help Clint had given her. It was the way his kindness had inspired others to step up and offer their support. She began to realize that one act of generosity could ripple outwards, touching not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. As news of Clint Eastwood's gesture spread, it caught the attention of media outlets beyond the local town. A regional news station picked up the story, and soon it was being shared across social media. Headlines like "Hollywood Legend's Act of Kindness Changes a Pregnant Woman's Life" began popping up. People from all over the country were touched by the story, sharing it online with messages of hope and admiration. Clint, ever private and humble, hadn't anticipated the attention. He wasn't looking for recognition. He had done what he felt was right, plain and simple. But as calls and emails began coming in from journalists seeking interviews, Clint's team released a short statement on his behalf. Mr. Eastwood believes in the power of community and lending a hand when you can. He hopes this story inspires others to look for opportunities to help those around them. The statement, simple and to the point, resonated deeply with people. Online, discussions sprang up about the importance of small acts of kindness and the impact they could have. People shared their own stories of times when a stranger's generosity had changed their lives, creating a wave of positivity and inspiration. Meanwhile, Sarah couldn't believe how far her story had traveled. Friends and family she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to offer their congratulations and support. One distant cousin, who owned a baby supply store, even sent her a care package filled with essentials like diapers, blankets, and bottles. "You deserve this," they wrote in the accompanying note. "You've always been one of the strongest people I know." For Sarah, the story wasn't just about Clint. It was about the way one moment of kindness could bring out the best in people everywhere. With all the attention and support pouring in, Sarah found herself stepping into a new chapter of her life. She no longer felt like she was simply surviving. She was finally starting to thrive. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to slow down and focus on her health and well-being. She cut back on her hours at the gas station, taking the time she needed to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. She used Clint's financial gift wisely, creating a budget that ensured every dollar went to something meaningful. She paid off outstanding bills, set up a small savings account for emergencies, and bought the essentials she'd been worrying about, like a safe crib, baby clothes, and supplies. It wasn't just about having the money. It was about the freedom it gave her to make thoughtful decisions without the constant pressure of living paycheck to paycheck. As the months went by, Sarah began to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of her struggles. She found joy in the little things again, decorating the baby's nursery, spending time with friends, and even reading books about parenting and self-care. The sense of community support and kindness she had received gave her a newfound confidence. She wasn't just preparing for her baby's future, she was rebuilding her own. And as her due date approached, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. What had started as an ordinary day at the gas station had turned into the catalyst for a transformation she never could have imagined. She felt stronger, more hopeful, and more determined than ever to create a better life for herself and her child. The day finally came when Sarah welcomed her baby into the world, a beautiful, healthy little girl she named Grace. Holding her daughter for the first time, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the gift of motherhood, but for the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Clint Eastwood's kindness, the community's support, and her own resilience in facing the challenges life had thrown her way. As she gazed at Grace's tiny face, Sarah made a promise. She would give her daughter a life filled with love, stability, and opportunity. She knew it wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take on whatever came next. Clint's act of generosity had given her more than just financial help. It had given her the strength to believe in herself and her ability to overcome adversity. The news of Grace's birth spread quickly through the community. Neighbors and friends stopped by to offer congratulations, bringing small gifts and warm wishes for the new mother and her baby. One neighbor even arranged for a local photographer to take professional pictures of Sarah and Grace as a gift. The photos captured not just their smiles, but the undeniable bond between mother and daughter, a bond forged through love, determination, and hope. Sarah sent Clint a handwritten letter to let him know how much his kindness had meant to her. In it, she included a photo of Grace, along with a heartfelt message. "Your generosity gave me the chance to be the mom I always wanted to be. Grace will grow up knowing that the world is full of good people because of what you did for us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Years later, Sarah often found herself reflecting on the day Clint Eastwood walked into that small gas station and changed her life. Grace was now a curious, bright-eyed little girl who loved hearing stories about how her mom had overcome the odds. Sarah always told her, "You were my greatest motivation. But that day, we had an angel watching over us." Grace would giggle and ask to hear more, fascinated by the idea that someone like Clint Eastwood had been part of their story. For Clint, the memory of that day stayed with him as well. It wasn't something he talked about often, but every now and then, he thought of Sarah and wondered how she and her baby were doing. He had done what felt right in the moment, and knowing that his actions had made a difference was all the reward he needed. Stories of his generosity continued to inspire others long after the headlines had faded. In Sarah's community, the ripple effects of Clint's kindness were still felt. The story had brought people closer together, reminding them of the power of compassion and the importance of looking out for one another. It had sparked a renewed sense of community spirit, with people more willing to lend a hand or offer a kind word when someone was struggling. As Sarah tucked Grace into bed one evening, she looked around at their modest but cozy home, a home filled with love and laughter. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, a journey that began with a simple act of kindness from a stranger. "Never forget, Grace," she whispered as her daughter drifted off to sleep. "Even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life."